All right. Good afternoon. It's 12 o'clock. It's Wednesday. It's time for an Iowa Learning Farms conservation webinar. I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University and really excited to be able to be back hosting the webinar this week and definitely have a great topic today, important topic on saturated buffers. So, I'm going to introduce Dr. Ehsan Ghane, he's an associate professor and extension specialist with Michigan State University. Our interactions go back quite a number of years, and so it's great to see the always exciting work that Dr. Ghane is doing. It always brings up new insights and generates new thoughts. He's going to talk to us today about saturated buffers, proven practice with new surprises. As always, if you have questions, please type those into the chat box and I'll get those to our speaker at the end of the talk. Asan, with that, the virtual floor is all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Ehsan Ghane. I'm going to talk about saturated buffers today, and I'm going to unveil some of the findings we've had and some of the surprises, we call them, about saturated buffers. This is a map of the river raising watershed on the southeast of Michigan, and I'm just going to show you where the field research site is located, which is the CL site. This red square on the western side of the river raising watershed that flows into Lake Erie. This is where phosphorus is a concern, but we're going to be talking about nitrogen here. So this is a saturated buffer system. So it is, I'm going to show you different various components of the system and how each one behaves under real world conditions. So a saturated buffer system really is comprised of um, a controlled drainage component. So as you can see in this diagram, we have laterals, which are these pipes under the ground, and then you got a main pipe collector here that flows into the ditch, carries water away, and you got a control structure. The control structure diverts water sideways into these perforated pipes. That's the main component that I'm going to get to. So the first chamber here, as you can see, it's behaving like a controlled drainage component. So that's why we call this component controlled drainage component, because water comes in, flows over the weirs, and then into this middle chamber. The second component is called the subsurface buffer flow component. And this is where water slowly comes out of the perforated pipe that is buried under the ground. And from there, water slowly seeps through the buffer soil in a subsurface flow component. And it slowly finds its way to the ditch or moves through ET. And it's basically eventually the nitrate component through denitrification, nitrate gets lower, concentration nitrate goes down. That's where the water quality benefit comes from. There's a third component that it's very important. It's called the buffer strip component. So there is no saturated buffer without a buffer strip. So really a buffer strip is required. You can't have a saturated buffer without a buffer strip. To sum up this slide, a saturated buffer system, I'd like to use the system because it's got three components. This saturated buffer system really is made up of a buffer strip, as I mentioned. The buffer strip takes care of the surface runoff. All of the sediments, the particulate phosphorus that may run off the field, that's its job here. The second part I explained was the subsurface buffer flow, which you are familiar with if you work with saturated buffers, and you know that it treats the nitrate in the drainage discharge that's moving through the soil profile. And then there's a third last one, which is the control drainage component. Basically, this one takes care of, it uses drainage discharge by managing the elevation of the outlet through these weirs here. It does a great job for nitrogen reduction and also for phosphorus reduction as well. So now that we know the saturated buffer system, let's look at our experimental design. So very simply put, we were able to um, use a paired field approach. So what does that mean in simple terms is that we really compared a such buffer system versus a conventional free drainage. So the conventional free drainage was our control. Just like you have other experiments that you have a control, like in a no-till versus conventional tillage, the conventional tillage. So we have a control that we can compare it to, which is in this case, a conventional free range system. So this had not done before in the past, but it has tremendous benefits. And this unveils all of the secrets of saturated buffers. So let's see. Uh, and actually, another thing here I want to point out here is that this field that we had, it had about a 1.1% slope, which if you work with ACPF, which is a tool that you can add to ArcGIS to do suitability of these practices, conservation practices in general. In there, the ACPF follows the NRCS, and the guideline is you need to have a such buffer is suitable for a field that has a 2% slope to about an 8. So 2% is a minimum there. However, we violated that. Our field was unsuitable for ACPF and is about 1.1%, let's say 1. But let's see how they turned out. So because of that unique experimental design that we were able to implement, we were able to look at these different components that I showed you at the beginning. We can actually dissect those and show you what is each one doing. That's the power of this experimental design. So here I got a graph on the right. I got nitrate load, which is the main benefit here. And then I have a percent nitrate load reduction, the percent. And here you can see I have upstream chamber effect, which is in other words, it's a control drainage effect. I'm going to call it CD effect or control drainage effect. In this overall, over the years of 2023 and 2024, these are 2 water years, it had about 53% nitrate load reduction. When you look at it as a whole, as a system, which I also explained, which is combined control drainage plus subsurface buffer flow component, when you add those two benefits up together, it becomes a 66% natural flow reduction. As you expect the whole system to be more beneficial than just one component of the system, which is what we expect. And that's what the data is showing here. So you have a 66% versus a 53%. And this is a side view of what that structure would look like that I just showed you in the previous slide. The first chamber is the control drainage. The middle chamber diverts water sideways into the distribution pipe. We call that the subsurface buffer flow component. And then the whole together is called saturated buffer system, SP. So really, going back to that diagram again, the difference between the 53 and the 66, the gap between these two is what the subsurface buffer flow performance is. So really the difference is that subsurface buffer flow component, the difference between these two. So surprisingly, this is the first surprise we found was that that first component, which is the upstream chamber, was pretty impressive with 53% reduction. That was the first surprise here. So the message, so the message of this slide, the take-home message of this slide is that we found that the upstream chamber, which is, in other words, the controlled energy effect here, was a really big player. It had a major role to play, and you can see the data, 52% nitrogen load reduction. So you may wonder how could that be possible? This wasn't even suitable in terms of the ACPF. It was not 2% slope and higher, it was less. And now it's showing, even controlled drainage removal. So what is going on? So let's look at another diagram here. This is the same diagram, but I'm going to show you what is happening here. So as you remember, I mentioned that these are laterals, and laterals are perforated because they drain water from the soil. That's their function here. They take water from the soil into these lateral pipes. These are the pipes typically 4 inches. And this is another pipe here that's called a perforated main. It's also perforated. So as water comes down in that slope field, water slow because all of these pipes are perforated, water slowly seeps out of those pipes. It becomes like a distribution pipe. So here I'm showing you where those happen because this yellow oval here is really representative of the area impacted by control drainage. If you work with control drainage, we have a term, either we call it zone of impact or area impacted, which is where the water would be managed for the crop production. And here, because of all of these perforated pipes, these pipes, water slowly seeps out of them because the field has a slope downwards. And from there, as water seeps out, then it starts to increase the lateral seepage. So the raised water level inadvertently creates additional distribution pipes. That's the amazing part of the system where we didn't know before. In fact, my colleague, Dr. Schereker, he's doing something similar where he has no distribution pipes, but just a main pipe, a pipe that's perforated. And with a structure here, you can push water out of that structure. The structure becomes a distribution pipe. So without having to install these distribution pipes, we can inadvertently create additional distribution pipes in the system. And that has its water quality benefits. So the increased lateral seepage occurs towards the ditch, and through that process, again, the denitrification, the same process is coming to play. So we have water quality benefits here. So the message of this slide is that the upstream weir management, which is the controlled drainage weir management, is a vital component of saturated buffer. We should not overlook this. It is a very important part of it. So you may be thinking about, oh yeah, I explained it in a 3-chamber structure like this, but what about the 2-chamber structure like this? So the answer here is that the same water dynamics, the water balance here is very similar. In practical application, these are used. I know in Iowa they use these commonly. And you can see the distribution pipes goes into the upstream chamber. And even in these, we speculate that likely the same things are happening based on the water balance and how water moves in the soil. These would have similar effects in both of those systems, both of those structures. So again, even in the 2-chamber structure, you still have this effect of the upstream chamber. So another component is the effect of the weir management. This one is no surprise. You already know this one, but I'd like to share it anyway. Here you got a low-level weir management, about 2 feet depth. And then here we got a more aggressive one, which is closer to the surface, about a 1-foot depth. So there's a difference, about a foot difference, and then you probably can guess at this point which one is going to perform better in terms of nitrogen load removal, and we expect that. So we expected the high level to be higher, and it is. And you can see this is the daily average nitrogen load reduction. It's a daily, and it's in pounds per acre. It's not a percentage, it's pounds per. As you can see, this is greater than the low level. There is no surprise. This is what we expected. Even models would show you the same results. So the message here is that the more aggressive management boosted the performance of saturated buffer. So that's a key part to keep in mind. If you're doing saturated buffer design or you're managing it, it would be really useful for water quality to actually get it more aggressive as much as possible, as much as you can, without flooding the area at the edge of the field. So now let's go to backflow. This is a tip for the designers. Anybody who's designed one of these, this is a tip for them. Backflow of water from the buffer into the control structure. So what do I mean by that? So this is the top view of a saturated buffer. This is the distribution pipe. This is the pipe. I'm going to show you a cross-section area of the A here, which is going to look like this. And you can see, so the field is looking farther away into the screen, and the part that is away from the screen is the ditch, really. So if one of these negative grades or uphill grades are implemented, which are also common for the sediment flushing benefits. So then what happens is that this acts like a drain tile pipe. So some of the water moves into this structure under certain conditions, which I will show you here. Um, Under the condition, this will happen on the condition that the weirs are really, really low inside the structure. So this is the data. I'm going to just very quickly show you here. I want to get to the message. So in the first 2 years, we had very mild management and the backflow occurred in these 2 years. But then, and the reason was we had low level weir management. The weirs were even lower than the numbers that I showed you when I was comparing those low and high. It was even lower. And then the upheat grade or the negative grade moved water inside the structure, like this graph here. Negative grade water moved in. And that's when we went aggressive. And when we did, there you go, and we saw the benefits of the subsurface buffer flow components, which is these latter 2 years. So the message here is that the tip, this is the design tip. If you are installing one of these uphill grade distribution pipes, use high level weir management. If your weir levels are low, not aggressive enough, water will find its way into the structure. Then you got negative benefit. Nutrients are coming in rather than pushing them out into the distribution pipe. So that's a design tip um, to keep that in mind. So the high level is key here. So another component here is looking at apparent and actual performance. So what do I mean by that? Let's look at this. So what we looked at methodology in the literature. And because of the unique setup of the experiment, the unique setup allowed us to do extra that hadn't done, was not done before. So because of unique setup, so in the past studies, there was no control. Control, what do I mean by control? As I mentioned earlier, is that there is a conventional free drainage system that you compare it to. It's similar to if you're doing different tile spacing experiments, and then you have one field or plot that is on drain. On drain field is your control. Here, our control is a conventional free drainage system, which for I will explain the reasons, but in the previous studies, they did not have a control, which is that free drainage. And this flow with the arrow was used as that control. And then what we did in this experiment, we were fortunate to be able to do this experiment in this way, which allowed us and gave us this control, which was the conventional free drainage because it was a paired field approach. And this opened up a lot of new insights, some of which I already mentioned about the control drainage component, dissecting those effects. That is only possible if you're doing it the paired field approach. So I'm going to call the method that was used previous studies as the apparent performance, and then I'm going to use the new method as the actual performance, which only is allowed if you have a control and the paired field approach. And these are 2023, 2024, and the average of the 2 years. And on the y-axis, I have nitrate load reduction in percent. So let's look at the first numbers here. This is the apparent performance. If we were able to use, basically here what we did is that we took the previous method that was used, it's a common method, and we applied it on our data. These are the percentages of nitrate load reduction we got. And then we applied the new method using that control, and this is what we got. And it's considerably higher. And the difference is this underestimation due to the method of not having this control. And the reason we were able to do that, so one of the challenges of using the method we did is it's it's going to take double the time. If we were going to do a 3-year project with a such buffer with the previous method, you can do it in 3 years, but here you're going to need 6, and you're going to have to monitor another field. So you're doubling, double, multi um, factors come in, the expense goes up, the time, these are really, really valuable. So a lot of resources have to be thrown out in an experiment to do it with this way to find the actual performance. That's the reason that the other method is coming because it's quicker and it costs less. And so the message of this slide is that saturated buffers have been performing better than previously thought because the ones that have been done, there's likely those, if we were able to perform this methodology, we would see that it's slightly higher or greatly higher like this one. It is going to be site specific. Last component I'm going to talk about is cost effectiveness of the saturated buffers. Because of this unique experiment, we were able to do some cost numbers because really cost effectiveness is the annual cost divided by the nitrogen load removed. So it's really dollars per pound of nitrogen removed. This is the structure, side view again, and the whole thing is a saturated buffer, just to remind you which one is which. So the control unit is the upstream chamber, subsurface buffer component is the middle chamber, the whole thing together is saturated buffer system. So this is what we did. We had all of the data and we performed a cost effectiveness, which is the dollars per pound of nitrogen removed. Look at some of the numbers. This is very interesting to see that the controlled energy alone was about $5 per pound of nitrogen removed. And then when you look at the such buffer system, it's about $7.43 removed. So the controlled energy alone outperformed the such buffer system if you were just to look at the dollars, the cost effectiveness, by about $2 difference per pound. So the message here is that, but I want you to know that this SB system did remove more nitrogen than the controlled energy component, of course. And the message here is that even though the whole system together removed more nitrogen, when you look at the cost effectiveness, the dollars that were put in to remove nitrogen, the CD alone was more effective. And this, like I mentioned, this is site specific and it really depends on the layout of the drainage system. If your field has laterals near the edge of the field, like in this case, which is within the area impacted of the control drainage, then you will have, inadvertently, you will create distribution pipes. And that will create a lateral seepage and nitrogen load removal. So the take-home message is, looking at the whole picture here, we looked at it, we were able to use this control and we were able to look at we were able to dissect the effects of the first chamber and the middle chamber. And here we have the control drainage component was a really big player. It played a major role in nitrogen load reduction. When we went from a low level to a more aggressive weir management, the weirs that were closer to the surface, like a shallower setting, we were able to double nitrogen load removal. So that was very effective. The design tip was that if you are installing the negative gradient distribution pipe, consider high-level management when you're writing the management plan. That will help prevent the backflow. The high level will be key in that aspect. And also, I showed you the apparent performance using past experiments and the new method that shows that saturated buffers have been performing better than we give them credit for because we were only able to use the apparent performance. That's limited based on how the experiment is laid out. We were not able to see the actual performance, which is going to be better. So when we talk about saturated buffers, we can proudly say they are doing better than we thought. And circling back to the comment I made about the ACPF tool and the suitability of saturated buffers, that I said that inside that tool, 2% grade and above are used to identify suitability of the saturated buffer system. If you remember, um, this is the last point actually. If you remember, our field was only like 1.1%. So the recommendation based on our research is that we should consider the slopes 1% and greater for saturated buffer suitability. ACPF or other tools that you're using, that's the new finding that we've just published this recently. So that would be the last bullet point. And also the one to the last is this controlled drainage alone was more cost effective. And I mentioned that site specific. It means laterals within the area impacted by controlled drainage. These are our sponsors: Michigan State, MDOT, Eagle, NRCS, Michigan Alliance for Animal Agriculture, Michigan Soybean Promotion Committee, and Corn Marketing Program of Michigan. I want to make an announcement about the conference that's coming up. The Conservation Drainage Network meeting is coming up the first week of June, June 1st to June 4th, and we are hosting it for the first time. This is a national conference. I highly recommend, if you're interested in water quality and drainage, this would be the place to go. Industry, academics come together and they share ideas, address drainage issues, water quality issues at the field scale and also at the watershed scale. So you can check, this is the QR code for the registration of that. And also on the first day, we have a workshop. We talk more about saturated buffers. So if you're into saturated buffers, we will be talking more about the tools on the first day of the saturated buffer. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Hassan. Okay, I'll get through these logistical slides and he can catch his breath. And we got some questions in. I want to thank the key funding partners to the Iowa Learning Farms that makes this conservation webinar series possible. Wouldn't be able to do it without them. So thank you so very much to the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, and the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. If you watch this webinar live and are wanting to earn a CCA CEU, please email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW, at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today. Include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, ALENAW at iastate.edu. Your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Let's go to the next slide. If you watch this webinar live and are willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, we'd greatly appreciate it. Only one survey response is needed for 2026 webinars. You can scan that QR code or go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey. To do that, again, only one survey response is needed for 2026 webinars. So if you've done that, thank you. And if not, and are willing, that would be fabulous. Let's go to the next slide. We're going to continue with our Beyond the Basics cover crop series, and not doing a chat in person like we've done the last couple months, but we have Dr. Shalimar Armstrong, that's at Purdue University and professor of agronomy and conservation cropping systems, talking to us about soil nitrogen fate, availability, and utility. Are all cover crop species equal? This is getting back to what people have indicated. They wanted more information about kind of that soil nitrogen fate. And so we got Dr. Armstrong with us next week. So please tune in to that in our continuing Beyond the Basics series. And if you know somebody that might be interested, make sure they know about it. The more, the merrier. All right, let's go. Next slide. If you watch this webinar, or sorry, you can find today's webinar archived and all previous webinars archived in the ILF webinar archive location or on the YouTube Iowa Learning Farms dash webinars site. So again, if kind of like the last thing, if you know somebody that might find this webinar useful or interesting, or you want to go back and watch something, please go to those links. Okay. We've gotten a number of questions in here, and maybe we can, first off, maybe you can describe, where did you take the readings to come up with the nitrate reduction for the controlled drainage?
So the readings was on the upstream chamber inside
Okay.
that chamber that I showed. It was within that first chamber, or upstream chamber, we call it.
Okay. And then, and it's, you kind of mentioned this about needing more years or more sites. So how confident can you be in these results despite having the control field? Even similar fields can have differences. So did you run those in kind of free drainage, both fields in free drainage for a period of time?
Yes. So we were able to um, let me show you this one right here. So we went into the saturated buffer. We bought these pneumatic inflator plugged. We plugged both of these two
Okay.
distribution pipes uh, from here and here. This is what it looks like. And we checked them for leaks. We didn't just leave them. We check them, we make sure we don't see signs of leaks. And once you put these in and inflate them, they're pretty good. If you've used one of these, you know what I mean. It is pretty good. These really inflate from the inside of the pipe. It just doesn't let water come out. Of course, just like a control structure, you see some leaks, maybe some drops coming, but the flow, really the true flow, we were able to take it out. And then with that, what does that mean is that we had one free drainage here and then another free drainage that was a control. So we had two free drainage for 2 years, 2 full years, and then we went from there with the paired field.
Okay. Okay. And I'm assuming then kind of looked at that kind of a paired approach, looking at the response when they were both in free drainage and then
Yes,
response when it was free and out. So, I think one of the things that's come up in a few questions is that if we have this controlled drainage, we are going to get some lateral seepage. I mean, that's kind of what you showed, but maybe talk about that, by then we have that saturated buffer there, so that lateral seepage um, has that buffer there for denitrification as it moves to the stream.
that is true. That you exactly what you mentioned that um, the pipes, the perforated pipes that are, but the key is I may be able to illustrate that with a diagram a little bit better. So if you look at this, oh no, um, not this one, the previous, but this one. So if you look at this graph on the
Yeah.
top, I'm going to zoom in. So this shade is we call this area impact. If you've done control lineage work and you're familiar with what this,
Yep.
basically this blue color is, and because within these, especially these ones at the edge, there's pipes here that are all perforated. Really, and then there's a head from uphill that is the one on the south side of this field, pushing water down. So these become inadvertently, they become narrow. The distribution pipes, water seeps down into the ditch.
Yeah. But if we didn't have the saturated buffer there, we might not have as much opportunity for kind of removal of that nitrate as it seeps down there.
So the distribution pipe, so like in the data that I showed, the distribution pipe adds more nozzle removal, no doubt.
Yeah.
It adds more because then you're adding another distribution pipe. It's just like going from a 300 to a 400 or 500 length distribution pipe. The longer, the more distribution pipes, the more nitrogen and the more water that's going to be treated.
Any issues with roots clogging the laterals in your work on
No,
saturated buffers?
no, we have not experienced any issues with roots clogging. The
Okay.
distribution pipes, or even at the farm scale for just conventional tile drainage, no. This is a corn soybean rotation farm, no issues there.
Okay. Um, are the results of this only relevant to saturated buffers on fields with low slopes?
So that's a good question. Uh, what I mentioned was in our publication is that um, even if the field is even steeper, let's say 2%, even 3%, it really the decision maker, if you want to know, I think we should I think the word slope that we use, like ACPF uses, because of its ease. It's simple, right? But if if it's done with the area impacted, which is more complex to do, and in the analysis phase, that would give you a better picture because you could have a 3% slope, but still within you got laterals that are perforated within the area impacted zone.
Yeah.
Then you say, yes, it works. So it's harder to find the answer with area impacted, and then it's easier to just say with slope. So really, the better way is the area impacted, like I showed in the map with the area. I've got pipes, and if for example, in that field, the one that I just shared, if I were to repeat that and the field was sloper and the area impacted was a spec, I mean, then I would say no, it's just not gonna do. It's just too steep, and my area impacted is too small. It doesn't carry any perforated pipes.
Yeah. Um, can you explain the reason behind the negative grade issue causing lower reductions on situations when the weir is set well below the surface?
Yes, that's a good question. Let me Let me see if I have a diagram to explain that. So really, okay, I'm going to bring up that diagram again to answer that question. So if you remember, let's click forward. Yep. So this graph at the bottom here. So the reason is, um,
Okay.
if in a conventional tile drainage system, how do we put a tile in? We put it as a positive grade, so it drains water and moves water away. So just think of it in a tile drainage system, not so much a saturated buffer for now, for instance here. And if you think about that way, oh, I got a structure, I got a lateral, it's gonna act like a tile drain pipe lateral because just like a lateral is going downhill to move water away, this is doing the same thing. There's water coming in, and we saw that in the first 2 years because we were not managing it and high enough. I wonder if I have another diagram, but if I put the weirs down here, let's say I put the weirs down here where I'm putting this scribble here, then the head of water above here, because the water table is
Yeah.
higher, it's going to flow water into this point. But if I put it high enough, I can actually push water the other direction because it's all about head. If this is high enough, you see right now this is high. I'm gonna take some of these out. You see this one is higher
Yeah.
than here. So I got this gradient pushing it the other direction. So it means that in this diagram, I have my weirs closer to the surface that pushes water the other way. But if they're not, then the head becomes in the other direction.
Yeah. Okay. Um, did the I think this would probably be a, good question many farmers would ask, kind of that impacted area. Did the backflow from the controlled drainage SB system have any impact on soybean or corn yield?
That's a good question. No,
Okay.
the backflow um, actually because the backflow doesn't occur like every year. It only occurred in springtime when there's the ground or is the snow is thawing, ground saturated, the hot water table is higher. That's the greatest risk at that time when it happens. And when we try to lower those, we saw it will just drain water away. And this is not the only place. Gabe Johnson and others have also written about this, that there is this phenomenon that is happening, and it can be um, addressed by having this weird set. So having a site that doesn't need stop block removal becomes a positive here. In this case, that lateral that had backflow actually drained water away. So it's actually, theoretically speaking, it's just taking water away faster from the edge of that field. But I don't believe one lateral would make a yield change really.
Yeah.
That would be hard. You need a network of pipes really to do that.
Yeah. Um, it sounds like the controlled drainage component is where the majority of the nitrate reduction occurs. What are the mechanisms of nitrate reduction in this zone of the system?
So the mechanism is once the water table at the edge of the field, it's slowed down, and you got a network of perforated pipes within that area impacted zone. Water will seep out through those pipes. And when it seeps out, it will eventually have to go somewhere. And it's going to find its way to the lower gradient, which is the end ditch area. That will be the lowest part. Of course, depending on the season, some some will be ET, evapotranspiration, but the dominant component is just going to go through the soil because these water tables are pretty deep. They're deep. You're looking at 3 feet or 4 feet. I mean, it is deeper in the ground at when you get to that edge of the field because these ditches are big. And so really the mechanism to answer your question is really water moving through the soil, and as it's moving through lateral seepage, you get this denitrification happening because there's organic matter, there's anaerobic um, denitrifying bacteria there present in the soil system, and they get the job done. So it's similar to what we talk about saturated buffers and distribution pipes. It's similar, it's the same method really. It's just that now we got a little bit few more distribution pipes really.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of people have kind of asked about this. I mean, if the thing that makes this kind of advantageous is we also if you just had the controlled drainage in that situation without the saturated buffer, without that vegetation and having that zone for denitrification, we may not see the type of dramatic reductions that you're showing there as well.
Yeah, definitely adding more distribution pipes will get you more nitrogen load removal. Just like if you make the length of the distribution pipe longer, that's direct relationship associated with more nitrogen removal.
Yeah. It's like making your distribution lines longer in some ways. Yeah. Um, in any of your sites, I mean, this is kind of a question. Some folks here have looked at it and not seen a problem with stream bank sloughing, but have you seen any stream bank sloughing in any of your saturated buffer work?
That's a great question. We actually put this comment in our peer-reviewed publication that we published. It is in there. We put it in supplementary because we didn't want to dilute the conversation. The conversation is about such buffer, but this is a site. Anyway, we published it, and the answer is, in our case, when we looked at this, we noticed that so you bank something, really you need to have a water higher. Um,
Higher than the level in the stream.
exactly. So I think I'd like to use this opportunity to show folks. I think this is very good, great question, just to inform us about what is really happening here. I may be able to find file, but it looks some. So let's say, so really we measured the flow, we measured the data, and if this is the no, if this was the bank
Yeah.
like this, really need for the slumping. If you look at the civil engineering, and you need to have a water table here, and you need to have a, I believe it's called the water seepage phase,
Yeah.
something. I think
Yeah.
seepage phase here. So
Yep.
you need to have something like this, like that. However, we had we had these observation wells like this,
Hmm.
and what we found was that this really was a direct relationship. So it was like this going up like
Okay.
this. Even when the water table came up, it still became like this. So
Yeah.
there wasn't any seepage phase in our data that we looked at the water level. And based on what we wrote in that publication, we said that this really people really need to look at this. Our preliminary data from looking at it, that I think it's overkill what is out there. It's not a risk. The water doesn't move, create that seepage phase. The water will find the surface of the ditch, the water will there, and then it's just gonna move a little bit flat, then it's gonna start to rise.
Okay. Great. Hassan, is that paper open access?
Open access.
Okay.
We
Do you have a
always do
link?
open
Do you have a
access.
link to it so we can put it in, and we'll also put it in the in the blog that comes out next week.
Yes.
So with that, I think that we have most of the questions answered at least. And so I will again say if you are wanting to earn a CCA CEU, email Elena Whitaker, ALENAW at iastate.edu. Email her by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. And if you are interested in cover crops and are continuing beyond the basics cover crop webinar series, please tune in next Wednesday at noon and hear from Dr. Shalimar Armstrong from Purdue University. So with that, thank you very much, Ehsan. And if you have that link, you can put it in the chat box, and we will also make sure that I'll get that to everyone right now, anybody that wants, and also we will make sure that that goes in the blog as well. So thank you so much, Ehsan. Good to see you as always, and thanks for sharing this information.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.